really happy to have found that Google actually had a new photograph of the Mut Temple precinct, and you can actually see it that it was done just in December of this past year, and that means that actually all of our squares that we have excavated behind the lake at the Mut Temple are actually visible on the Google image. This past summer, we were out May, June, and a little bit of July, and during that period, we were fortunate to have Christian Strutt from the University of Southampton come to do some magnetometry and ERT for us in the areas that you see indicated, this area here, and he did a long swath with the ERT from all the way to the north of the precinct, running back down in this direction. Having just watched Sarah's presentation, I feel like this is sort of the dark ages I'm about to show you, because it's really only been partially processed by Chris. But in any case, we can at least see what he's been able to tell us so far. Essentially, the magnetometry survey that he conducted in the area, this being south of all of our squares behind the lake, has indicated that there are intensive zones where there are houses, very likely, probably mud brick houses, and also a couple of walls running in southeast to northwest directions. And, oops, what did I do? Sorry. He also was able to indicate that that there are areas of intensive that we have very likely large kilns that we can excavate, and that was a real interest to us to determine from his findings. None of this was particularly surprising, but it does continue to confirm that all of this area south of the lake has intensive occupation. This is the result of the ERT at a depth of 1.5 meters below the present surface, showing the areas of intensive resistivity and probably a gap for some kind of road again between them. At a deeper level, 3.5 meters, there's still an area of intensive occupation down there, but as you can see, it's largely going blue, meaning that there's less going on the deeper we go down. And here he overlay the ERT on top of the magnetometry and essentially confirmed very much what the magnetometry had already said. So this is actually going to be helpful to us. We probably will, when we resume excavation, we probably will try to go to this central area and look at whether this is an industrial environment, and continue from the direction of actually also looking possibly for walls that may form an area that includes the region, the industrial region that we've been working in for almost 10 years now. So let me then turn over to talking about our excavations themselves. You'll see here on the map the area where we actually worked the squares this past summer. Over the time from 2002 until 2012, we worked in this area most of those years, at least to some extent. In this region here, we found breweries and bakeries. There are granaries throughout this area here, running east to west. Over here, you have the remains of an enclosure wall, almost certainly of the 18th Dynasty. So we resumed the work in this region in 2011 after having spent quite a while working in the temple on doing restoration. And we have essentially continued to find the area is a region of industry supporting the temple that represents the early 18th dynasty up to at least the end of Dynasty 18. And we also have underlying that in some areas Second Intermediate Period walls running at the same orientation as the 18th Dynasty walls. We have, however, also in other squares, Second Intermediate Period walls that are at completely different orientations. So just to review from past seasons, these were the squares opened in 2006. This granary we found first in 2003. So you get some sense. These are all about 4 meters in diameter. The area of brewing and baking, this is the levels associated with the end of the 18th dynasty, and this with the beginning of the 18th dynasty. This is an early 18th dynasty mixing jar in situ. Also, an enormous amount of leftover pottery from the processing that went on. We have a lot of beer jars, and we also have stamped amphorae, this one with the name of Thutmose III. Okay, so returning to the Google map, just to once more show that these are the squares that we've been working in since 2011. And in that time period, we opened up a fairly significant area, and we found just below the surface, as we always do behind the lake at Mut, the 18th dynasty, the early 18th dynasty, which is the date of the walls that you see here on the surface. And actually here, this trough is already in the Second Intermediate Period. On the other hand, we had what we think may be a mud brick ramp of sorts that actually Chris Strutt thinks he may have even picked up possibly an extension of in the magnetometry running well south of this. That made me very happy because I sort of think that this may have been one of the means, not in the early New Kingdom, but a little bit later, of actually bringing in the grain that was being processed and stored in the area. The pottery in this whole area often represents sort of toss-aways, but it is consistently of the New Kingdom, earlier New Kingdom. So we have sort of mid-18th dynasty, and we have slightly later 18th dynasty as well. We also have small votive objects that, given that we are in the Mut temple, it's probably not surprising that we have quite a bit of these kinds of small votives that actually represent Hathoric kinds of cults. One of the things that has come out, as some of you may know over the years, that Elizabeth Waraksa wrote her dissertation on the female figurines from the Mut temple. I'm still interested in having a more global notion of actually who those things were dedicated by, but in any case, this is a new addition for her to take a look at. And I think probably if any of you were here at my talk last year, you may recall that in this same region, this is the ramp I was just showing us from the other direction. This is where we found the deposit of the bound captive who had been executed on this stone to which he had been pilloried. Excuse me. And again, here's the ramp, and right over here is where the bound captive was. Now, I suggested last year that this area may have also had a small kiosk where the supervisor was able to actually watch the processing of the grain, and he would have been sitting, wait a minute, I lost myself. Oops, what happened to the slide? not here, sorry, would have been sitting in a kiosk supported by wooden columns erected on these two sandstone columns. These are on sand foundations that were placed in here in the early 18th dynasty. Our bound captive at a slightly lower level, and here too, all of that beneath the level of these sandstone column bases for wooden columns date to the Second Intermediate period. Now, moving on to look at what we found this past summer, that in these same squares we continued our work. And we have squares that have walls running in many, many directions. In this case, you can actually see several different phases and time periods. In this particular instance, we decided to move along and let it be, since there were too many walls. And we opened up instead a new square right here. And immediately in the second level, we started finding small objects in the name of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, and the pottery reflected the same time period. And one of the things we got lucky with is in getting even more precision with the dating of our walls. We were lucky enough for one of our undergraduates who was cleaning the mortar areas to draw this wall, and she found a scaraboid actually dug into it inside the mortar of this goose type, which actually has good late Second Intermediate period parallels. And, excuse me. But in other places that we worked, opening new squares, we found yet more granaries, yet more walls that surround and underlie those granaries. So no great big surprises actually in the fact that we continue to have a large industrial area. On the other hand, we did have surprises, and I thought for a long time about, could I give some kind of catchy name to my talk today, and I ended up giving up. But I thought about considering calling it Dem Bones, Dem Dry Bones, because that's really what we got this year. In square number 7, which where we had found the scaraboid, more excavation was done under Maggie Bryson, and she came upon a wall running east-west, which is certainly an early time period in the Second Intermediate period. Next to it, this three-sided structure would look almost like an animal stall of some sort. But what you see the Gufti looking at is right here, there is a near oval of mud brick that fits right in between the stall and the wall, as well as a little area of light sand that you see here. And as they began to clean, now you can see the mud brick, and in here, beginning to surface, is the circle of a skull, which was identified by Roxy Walker and Salima Ikram as being juvenile. Here in this area, we have another burial, and this is actually Salima taking a closer look. This is the bones, almost everything. I don't know why it is the rule that if you get something, part of it is in the bulk. What is with that? So every single one of these things, just about, part of it is in a bulk, as is the case with the head of this. But we do have in this instance, and it's the only one of all the bodies that we found this summer that had obvious offering gifts associated. So we've actually left them in situ, and things will be removed. Now, that's the next thing I have to say, is that we didn't expect this. Truthfully, some years ago, I stopped working in a tomb, and one of the reasons was I don't really like bodies a whole lot. And so I guess that's what I get. But in any case, we had Salima and Roxy for very few days because they were actually working on the bound captive skeleton. And then they left. And since they left, we decided that we would cover this material and it will be taken out, as much of it as possible, when they can return. Here's yet another example in square number 12, right in this area. If you look down from above the bulk, you actually see a rounded area of some mud brick, and right in there we actually found a small child's burial. The head, this time, though it looks like it's in the bulk, was actually sitting over here just behind its rear end and had been very badly burned, the head. In square central 6, we had, at a much higher level, not even a meter's depth, we have once again in the bulk, an adult this time in near fetal position, with the head would be turned to the north in this particular case. And it is in reasonably good shape. I'm kind of wondering if this might not turn out to be a pangrave burial, because this is a larger animal bone over in this area, so we're hoping that we will be able to see what we've got very soon when we can get back into the field. This is where that burial was that you just saw, that what comes out of the bulk like that. At a considerably lower level, we have another burial here, which is just the head. And I don't know if you can even tell, but that's actually teeth. You're staring at the upper teeth and the mandibles kind of hanging out of the bulk. Now, in square east 11, we had an area that had many rooms. It was actually the first chamber I showed you that we had excavated in the 18th dynasty. It had obviously had the form, at least, of a house. But in the second intermediate period, it seems like most of those walls were not there. In the 18th dynasty, when they were preparing to build, they must not have known that they were going through a cemetery, and so when they came, I don't know if you can tell, but these legs are sitting straight up in the air, so they just dug straight through and upended the legs of this poor deceased person, and that's how he's been found for posterity. Excuse me. Again, out of the bulk, a head, a cranium, so that most of the body is going the other direction. This time, the head would be facing south. The body, I don't know what position it was in. In the same trench that we had the bound captive here, at a lower level, I don't know how well you can see, but these are round mud bricks that we have found in 3 places seem to actually have been made to mark these kinds of burials. They're actually mud bricks, but in round shapes. And this cranium, unfortunately, the pickman accidentally hit it before he realized that he was at a burial. But we had at least 3 individuals in this corner buried, the parts of at least 3. And then one more final leg bone sticking out of a bulk here. So we have a total of at least 15 separate individuals that we literally ran into in 2012. We have 5 juveniles that are confirmed. They do seem to be true burials. We don't have any that we found buried in pots, that is the juveniles. But the question for us now is to try and understand more about who these people are. How am I doing? Okay. And we've found so far no indications of coffins, no indications of mummification, and no indications of clothing. But this is very early days because, as I say, our approach to this has been, once we can do a little cleaning to identify what it is, what its potential is, we have then recovered it to be taken later. So we're hoping that we will get at least something to indicate how these people were placed. Now then the second question is, why are they here? As I said before, I really thought that the necropolis was on the other side of the river. Most of these burials appear to be of the Second Intermediate period. This shows you so far where we have at least one person, and in several of those we have more than one burial. So to try and do any kind of comparison, there's certainly people refer to having found burials within various sites, and Elephantine is certainly one of those. So far, for the time period that we're talking about, I haven't found anything that's a perfect parallel, except of course for the juvenile burials. But at Elephantine, for the Middle Kingdom, there is one chamber burial in this house, number H86, and in that particular instance, in the phase directly before this house did not have this as a separate closed-off chamber. You see right here, they actually took this room, and in this layer, which is early 12th dynasty, they blocked it off. And then set in a chamber of mud brick in which was deposited an adult female. There are plenty of juvenile burials found in Elephantine. Here is this one here, I think, and I can't quite read it from here. And I think there are parallels for that in a variety of places. Another place to compare is Balat in the period after the Old Kingdom. You have a variety of juvenile burials that are found in the palace area up here, as well as underneath buildings in this region. The use pattern as described for Balat is exactly what we will be trying to deal with and looking at our particular burials, and that is that you have some that are found in context beneath the building, so they were there before it was built, and then you have others that were actually placed there at a period of abandonment. We're going to have to really look harder as we excavate the rest of these to determine which of those situations each and every one refers to. And then we hope we might be able to make some comment about who these people were. Were they the Merut who belonged to the temple? Were they people of the town who sneaked in to use it? And my final slide to say thank you to my wonderful group of helpers last summer. Thank you all.